Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing very well. And don't forget to go and get that perfect drink and let me know about it, because I love hearing what people drink. It's just incredible what's out there. The things that people drink, you think that we'd all drink coffee or tea, but we all have our own unique habits, which make us quite unique and special, so I like to hear about them. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'm never ever getting married, I piped, as I watched the deluge of rain splashing against the windscreen, the raindrops rolling down the glass, that were rhythmically wiped away by the wipers. In an odd, reassuring way, it really was comforting watching this repetitive motion over and over again. My mother glanced at me with a wistful, introspective look on her face, as she drove our family truck down some of Seattle's very wet roads on an evening when the traffic congestion was rife. There was bumper-to-bumper traffic, horns being blown by annoyed drivers, a general feeling of frustration caused by the gridlock of traffic. People were tired, frustrated after a hard day's work at the office, eager to get home, so invariably the backlog of accumulating traffic was most certainly not appreciated. I hope I didn't hear you right, Lucinda. Why on earth would you make such a decision like that? You're only 12 years old, for goodness sake. I'm looking forward to having grandbabies in the future. You wouldn't deprive me of that, would you? I'm not sure, Mum, that I can. I don't think I could live in a household of tears again, raised voices, petty squabbles, arguments. I don't want a life like that. I can't hack the idea of living in a hostile environment fraught with strife. It would do my head in. I thrive on peace, tranquility, security. I think I'm rather like a leopard. I like my own company. I'm solitary, keep myself to myself. That's the way I like it. It's always been that way for me. Oh, darling, that makes me so sad, so desperately sad. I can't believe me and your father have done this to you. My mother gripped the steering wheel tightly. I could see her eyes were misting over with regretful tears. My words had hit her hard like a knife to the guts. I hadn't meant to hurt her like this. I think she was secretly chastising herself for having played some part in making me so cynical about marriage. This traffic, said my mother. It's absolutely atrocious. When is it going to start moving, she said, almost grinding her teeth in annoyance. We could see a policeman wearing a yellow raincoat moving through the long line of stationary cars, occasionally stopping to talk to people through their windows, or clearly asking the officer exactly the same question. What's going on? Finally, he tapped on our windscreen. My mother wound down the window. Everything all right, madam? It would be if I could get home, officer. Why the standstill, officer? What's causing this dreadful chaos on the roads? I've never known it as bad as this. Won't be long now, madam. There's a fatal accident further up the highway, I'm afraid. A motorbike, a truck, a large tree. Before long, we drove our car past the scene of carnage. I could see the lights of a stationary ambulance still flashing, while two bodies covered in sheets were being carried in gurneys into the back of the ambulance. I could see a crumpled motorbike lying on the edge of the road, along with a mangled car, the front part crushed, buckled, disfigured and squashed up against a large tree. A scene of slaughter that spoke of catastrophe, devastation and loss. Tragic, tragic loss. It was in that moment I was hit with an epiphany. Life was short, and you could be here today, gone tomorrow. Seeing this accident confirmed these thoughts to me. Only an hour ago those two people were alive and kicking. Now they were being whisked off to the mortuary. What a dreadful, obscene loss of life. That was when I began to reflect on how many pointless days, hours, years and weeks my parents had fought like a belligerent pair of Rottweilers, day in and day out, until finally one day they realised that perhaps they shouldn't live together after all. It took them years to reach this very sensible conclusion. Even our next-door neighbour had been wiser and seen more sense when she rehomed one of her dogs that was being tirelessly bullied by her bull terrier. It would seem after my parents' divorce, life had become serene, peaceful, blissful even. The heavy energy in our home had completely lifted. I felt as if I could breathe again. So yes, I will admit, my view of marriage was permanently marred, scarred by my negative experiences in the matter. It was one day in the summer of 1984 that I was driving my truck down a dirt road, not too far from the towns of Cedro and Woolly, which are situated on the western edge of the majestic Cascade mountain range, north of Seattle, south of Bellingham, on Highway 20, along the banks of the Skagit River. I do remember the road was very remote, rugged, off the beaten track, so there was no passing traffic in sight. I was a wildlife veterinarian at the time. One of my clients had literally begged me to go and visit a friend of hers who had a horse struggling with colic. I was on my way back from treating the animal in question and advising the client on the treatment protocol that she obviously needed to follow, when I came unstuck in a way I would never have envisaged possible. In a trice I heard a thump, then a vibration, along with a loud flapping noise. I groaned. I knew my tyre had hit something precariously sharp in the road, like a nail or a piece of glass. It was now flat. By reasonable assumption, driving on a flat tyre is asking for an accident to happen, so I clearly could not proceed further along my way. I stopped my truck, groaning. In those days we didn't have the advantages of cell phones, so I knew I was in a dreadful pickle. I was pretty much stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no help in sight whatsoever. I climbed out of my car, not feeling terribly confident about changing a tyre. It was something I'd never attempted to do before, but I really had no choice in the matter, or I was likely stuck here for a very long time, until I chanced upon some much-needed help. Unfortunately, despite my very best efforts, I was unable to loosen the lug nuts with my wrench. I do not know how long I was struggling before a truck stopped behind my vehicle. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. Help had arrived for me at last. A young man stepped out of his vehicle. He came ambling towards me, wearing a debonair cowboy hat, denims and cowboy boots. "Need any help?" came a deep, gravelly voice. I looked up to find myself staring into the steely blue eyes of a quintessential no-nonsense American cowboy. "I'm having a little difficulty changing my tyre, that's all." "I can see that." The man bent beside my tyre with the wrench and effortlessly removed the lug nuts, as if they were merely hairpins, and within seconds he had removed my tyre, generously replacing it for me with the spare. He grinned at me. "Now, that wasn't so hard, was it?" "Don't look so smug," I said, feeling myself flushing with embarrassment. "You made it look easy, but I can assure you it was anything but." "Oh, but it was easy. Very easy," he teased. "Maybe for you it was, but there's no need to look so pleased with yourself about it. I can assure you I'm no damsel in distress. If that's what you're thinking, I'm perfectly capable of changing a tyre. It was those lug nuts. They were just so tight." "If you say so," said the man, looking rather amused. "You remind me of one of my horses." He grinned. "Starfire's the name. She's a spirited creature like you. It took me longer than most to break her in, but in the end she was eating out of my hands." "What are you insinuating? You think you could break me in, is that it? You think I'm like one of your horses? I've heard everything now." "I could break you in as easy as pie," he said, giving me a big wink, his eyes twinkling. "You really do have a high opinion of yourself, don't you?" I said. "Now, thanks for your help, but I need to be making tracks now." The man raised a brow. He looked disappointed. "Not so fast? You mean to say you're not going to buy me a drink? Isn't that the very least you could do in the circumstances? I've only just fixed your tyre for you. If it weren't for me, you would be stuck here all night. And as for making tracks, you would be going nowhere fast if I hadn't quickly come to your aid." "All right, I'll buy you a drink in Cedro, but then I have to make tracks. I have a cat at home that needs feeding. She gets very grumpy if her plate is empty." "Your grumpy cat sounds a lot like me when I haven't eaten, and I'm beginning to feel rather hungry. I think eating sounds like a good idea." Forget the drink. Join me for dinner. To repay me for my gallant kindness, of course. It wasn't long before I was seated in a restaurant with this handsome stranger, whom I remember thinking was rather cocky and sure of himself, so I didn't like him one little bit. I always despised arrogant men. In truth, he was the most pig-headed man I'd ever met, with a humongous ego on him the size of Seattle, or possibly bigger. So what were you doing with a flat tire on a remote dirt road? You could have been out there all night if I hadn't come along to rescue the poor princess in jeopardy. You really fancy yourself as some kind of knight in shining armour, don't you? You can forget that. Don't get any ideas. I'm not interested, I assure you. I never will be. Just so that you know. Is that some kind of a challenge, lady? Because if it is, I'm very game indeed. I've always been a successful betting man. I guarantee you one thing, lady. After 10 dates with me, you will be practically begging me to marry you. That's a fact. Are you kidding me? You think I'm going to beg to marry you after 8 dates? Or 10 dates, whatever you were saying. I mean, does that even happen? You really are the most obnoxious, appalling man I've ever met. I tell you what, you're on, I said defiantly. I was determined to show this man that if he thought he could charm the cotton socks of most women, it wasn't going to work on me, and I was not most women. I'm only agreeing to this crazy notion just to wipe that grin off your face. I'll go on 10 dates with you, just to prove to you that you're not as irresistible as you clearly think you are. Just to make a point, and that's it. Good, he said, smirking. Just so you know, I managed to break in Starfire sooner than most. The average horse takes about 4 to 6 weeks to break in. I broke in that wild horse within 8 days. No one else could do it, but I did. No one believed it could be done. She was one of the most difficult, tumultuous horses I've ever met. Stubborn, opinionated, feisty. I overcame the odds with her, much like I shall with you. First of all, I'd like to get one thing straight. I'm not one of your horses. Second, you'll never ever break me in. Get it? If you thought Starfire was difficult, you ain't seen anything yet. The man's lips twitched with amusement. We'll see, he chuckled. I'll say one thing to you. You will be begging me to marry you in 10 days. Against all the incredulous odds, it would seem that I was the one with egg on my face, as after the 8th date, I kid you not, the girl who'd sworn blind 1,000 times over to her mother that she would never ever get married, found herself agreeing to marrying this exasperating, self-assured man. But one thing to my credit is I didn't beg him to marry me. I admit he popped the question, and I just couldn't say no. He said it was the same thing. He'd won the bet. I wish I could have turned him down, but this man had me weak at the knees, much like everything else in his life that had surrendered to his charm, like the cattle on his ranch, his dogs, along with all his horses. It would seem that I was cast under his alluring spell. After we were married, I adapted to ranch life seamlessly. Before long, we had 3 boys running around the place like little terrorists, playing with their water pistols, and genuinely becoming as annoying as humanly possible. But life was so good. Very, very good. My mother had been absolutely right. Not all marriages are created equal, as my home was filled with a plethora of warmth, laughter, and an abundance of love, something I myself had not grown up with in my early years. I had decided to become a fully fledged ranch wife, but I had the distinct advantage of being able to use my veterinary skills to manage our large cattle herd, and of course the horses on our vast sprawling acreage of land. It wasn't long before I was rescuing all kinds of animals, from raccoons to foxes, squirrels, waterfowls, birds, and deer. As so many locals in the area would often bring wild animals to me that had been abandoned or had fallen victim to being hit by a car. It was my passion to help animals in distress, finally returning them back to the wild. I had achieved my aims with a measure of success, but one day something quite extraordinary happened that was to become one of the greatest highlights of my life. A 23-year-old girl I knew called Aviana visited me on my ranch. She phoned me to tell me she had found a strange creature that needed my attention, but she couldn't fathom what it was. But it looked like it was half ape and half human, she told me. I must admit I was rather intrigued, but I thought Aviana must have been exaggerating, but it turned out she was not. Even in the early stages of development, the tiny little infant already had a large pyramid-shaped head, with a powerful sagral crest. That's where the jaw muscles go up and down. I know that it is exceedingly strong in mountain gorillas, so that they don't end up crushing their own brain with their powerful muscles. Even as a youngling, the chest on the torso was remarkably sizable in relation to its body size. It also possessed broad hands and feet, and a very dark leathery face with large aquatic nostrils and deep-set dark eyes. I know it may sound like I am intrinsically describing an ape, but this is not so. It was incredulous how remarkably human this creature actually was. To put it in simple terminology, if you have a chocolate and cinnamon cake, it's still a chocolate cake, but it has a cinnamon twist. It was very much like this for the baby. It attained ape-like influences, or twists if you like, but it was still profoundly human. I could see the baby was in serious trouble and distress, as it was not responding to us in any way. Its silken hair was wet and clammy. Its eyes almost glazed over like a dead fish, although of course I could see it was alive. "Where did you find this baby, Aviana?" "Well, I was taking Mitzi, my little Jack Russell, for a walk in the woods. She darted over to this large tree, began to bark and bark. Mitzi never normally behaves in such a strange way, so I knew something was clearly bothering her a great deal. But I looked around the tree and could see nothing that really got my immediate attention. Well, not at first, as nothing untoward stood out to me. 'Mitzi,' I piped, 'there's nothing there. Let's go.' But that was when I heard a very low groaning, snorting sound, so I studied every inch of that tree as intensely as I could. That was when I saw the sizable obscure basket tied to the tree. Something was moving inside of it, but I didn't know what it was. I would have walked away and ignored it normally, as I really don't like disturbing wildlife of any kind. But this was not a bird's nest, it was a basket that had been weaved superbly into some kind of baby's crib. Something made me take a second look. I looked inside to see this baby in there, this one here, but I knew something was wrong with it. The eyes didn't look right. They were staring vacantly. The baby also seemed so hot. Well done for bringing it here. You may just have saved its life. Do you think the mother knows its baby is sick, Mrs. Villarreal? Not necessarily. Some viral infections and fevers can come on very quickly and fast. She may have left her baby in the basket for a while and decided to go searching for food, none the wiser as to the precarious condition of her youngling. That could easily have happened. I'm just worried about the mother, Mrs. Villarreal. She must be so worried to discover that the basket is now empty. It really would be like a bona fide abduction to the creature, discovering her baby vanished off the face of the earth, wondering who had possibly taken it. I can't imagine how I would feel if I was the one wearing her shoes. Well, it's better than discovering her baby dead, I said. I attached the baby to an IV drip, administering some antiviral medications. We're saving the youngling. If you hadn't discovered it in time, I guarantee you of this, Aviana, it would almost certainly have died. You saved the creature's life. Does it have a fighting chance, Mrs. Villarreal, in surviving, I mean? Of course it does. More than a fair chance, I'd say. This little wee thing has a robust constitution, probably better than ours. I'm sure it'll pull through very nicely, but then only time will tell. What is it, Mrs. Villarreal? Because it's not completely human, is it? Have you ever heard of the abominable snowman, Aviana? Who hasn't? You don't think... She looked at me, her shining brown eyes growing as wide as saucers. Are you kidding, Mrs. Villarreal? You really think that this is an abominable snowman youngling? I can't believe it. Are you being serious? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I am. But my advice to you, Aviana, is to keep this to yourself for the well-being of the animal. If you were to tell anyone about this, who knows where it would lead? I dread to think. This gorgeous little mite deserves to have a full and whole future. We can't jeopardise that for him. Imagine if the press were to find out about the poor little mite. They'd have a field day, let me tell you. Can you envisage the newspaper headlines? Young girl finds abominable snowman intact in woven basket on tree. I can guarantee you this, Aviana. Some kind of scientific authority, in the guise of cryptozoology research, will claim the rights to take this little infant away, prodding it within an inch of its life. Oh, how awful, gasped Aviana. Do you really think that would happen, Mrs. Villarreal? Think it? I pretty much guarantee it, Aviana. I'm sure you agree. This little mite deserves to be with its mother, back in the natural world. I wouldn't have it any other way, Mrs. Villarreal. But what are we going to do if the baby gets a lot better, and then we can't locate its mother? Oh, I think we'll be able to locate its mother. You do? But how can you be so sure? Because, Aviana, I'm a mother myself, with 3 young brats of my own. If one of them went missing from a Pacific area, you can bet your bottom dollar, for days, weeks, months, even years on end, I'd still go back to the scene of the crime, to search the area all over again, no matter how fruitless it might seem. A mother's love. Well, let's just say there's nothing like it. One day when you have children of your own, you will completely understand what I'm talking about. I'm glad to say that within hours, that little youngling was beginning to respond to my medications. And within 48 hours, let's just say that he had made remarkable progress. This was a kind of virus that would make a human baby sick for about 1 to 2 weeks, but on the 4th day this little baby was fighting fit. It was looking at me with these bright, sparkling, deep-set eyes, watching my every move curiously, following me around with its eyes. It was such an affectionate creature. I would jiggle it up and down on my hips. It would play with my long hair with its overlong arms. Me and my husband would sit with the baby on the wraparound porch of our farmhouse. It interacted with us with such an intelligence. It pulled my husband's cowboy hat off his head and began to examine the inside of the hat curiously. My husband also tickled its belly, and it began to laugh just like a human being. "Don't give me a look like that," said my husband to me. "What look? What you talking about?" "That look that says, 'Let's keep the youngling because it's so cute. I couldn't bear to part with it.' Of course I want to keep it, with all my heart. But then there's a mother out there, grieving the loss of her baby. I can't imagine what she's going through. We have to return it to her." "My thoughts exactly. You think the creature is strong enough now to return to its mother?" "Yes, I do. And the sooner the better." The next day I drove my truck to Aviana. Aviana was naturally astonished by how much progress the creature had made over a couple of days, and of course how healthy it had become. It was hard not to fall completely head over heels in love with the creature, because it was so loving, affectionate, funny, curious, responsive, intelligent, and the best mime artist you've ever seen, so good at imitating everything we did. "I can't believe how intelligent he is," she said, as the creature's overlong arms began to tug at her hair affectionately when she held it lovingly in her arms, and stroked its long silky coat, that even over a couple of days had grown significantly thicker. "A human baby, Mrs. Villarreal, would never be as sharp as this." "True, but remember this creature has to grow up in the wild fast, so it certainly needs a certain amount of alertness to survive the challenges of the wild." "Well, I suppose that makes lots of sense." Aviana's parents' farm was flanked by a sprawling area of natural woodland that sprawled over a vast acreage where she regularly took Mitzi for his daily walk. "Do you think you can remember whereabouts you found the baby?" I asked her. "Of course. How could I ever forget such a place? It's a very beguiling spot, overlooking the stream that meanders through the valley. Most of the statuesque trees in these woods are ponderosa pines, but this is one of the river birch trees, and this one is particularly large. Most river birch trees are small in size, but this one is huge, possibly because it's close to the water. That was where I found the basket tied to the tree. I imagine it's still there." "Good. It would be good to find it." "Do you really think we'll find the mother, Mrs. Villarreal? I mean, abominable snowmen are very elusive. Are you still confident that we'll see her?" "I don't know," I said. Just like I told you last time, it's a mother's hunch, an intuition if you like. We walked through the towering ponderosa pine trees that were clustered together like tall ballet dancers, reaching up into the cobalt sky with such a masterful elegance and grace, while the prisms of sunlight pinwheeled through the trees, bespeckling the floor with an ethereal phosphorescence. I was wearing one of my children's old baby slings, so that the cute little baby was now attached to my front side. We trudged awkwardly through the thick ground cover, which included viridescent ferns, mosses, herbs and creeping foliages, until we reached the trickling stream. We moved towards the river birch trees, and that was when Aviana froze. She pointed towards a large river birch tree, with its graceful outstretched branches cascading over the water's edge, rather reminding me of a weeping willow. "Over there," she whispered. "I think that's the mother. It must be her. I'm sure of it." "Where?" I asked. "I can't see her." "Over there, look. Can't you see? To the right." "Oh, yes." At first my eyes could only discern the foaming white bubbles of the crystal clear water, crashing, beating, thrashing against the rocky boulders with a feisty force as it hurried along its determined course through the valley. But sitting there on a smooth rocky outcrop, overlooking the babbling stream, was a tall solitary figure, covered with long flowing dark hair, with the straightest back that I have ever discerned before. But despite her graceful deportment, I could feel that by contrast her depleted energy was slouched, slumped, drooping over, much like the graceful branches of the river birch tree draping over the stream, as if every bone within her powerful body was crumbling, folding, heaving, under the hefty weightiness of her emotional despair that ebbed through her heart, that had drained her joy like a blood-sucking leech. This ambiguous creature had gathered a large pile of stones together that were placed by her side. She was randomly throwing them into the water with her overlong arms, rather like a penny in the Trevi fountain in Rome, as if every single stone she threw into the water that went plunging into the murky depths represented a wish in her heart. If you were to see her sitting on a sidewalk on a street in Seattle, you would instinctively feel the creature's pain, for it hung in the air like the bold, brash, impertinent tinsel on a Christmas tree that could not be overlooked. It was such an outspoken, poignant, sad energy that my eyes misted over with moisture, while a couple of stray tears glistened on my eyelashes, clinging to them tightly like opaque raindrops. I don't know why I've never really considered that the mother of this youngling might indeed just be the most intimidating creature in the entire universe. In truth, that idea had never even crossed my mind. I'd been so excited to return the youngling to its mother that I hadn't even perceived any risk factors that might be involved in attempting such an arduous, intrepid mission. But now that I was standing in the woods, only a few feet behind the creature, I was having serious reservations, for the size of her from the back view, sitting down, was scarily large. Imagine how huge she would be if she was to stand up straight. I literally dreaded to think. It was clear, even from the back view, that this creature was an apex predator. You would have expected her to notice us at once. Maybe she already knew we were there, but she didn't care. Her pain had sapped her normally sharp instincts. Ariana whispered to me, "She's so huge. Let's just put the baby down and get the heck out of here." Just from her back view, my knees are virtually buckling beneath me from my nerves. We don't know how she could react to us. She could be dangerous, exceedingly dangerous, aggressive even. It was hard to believe that anything connected to this adorable, cute little youngling that had fallen fast asleep in my arms against the warmth of my chest could be anything but amenable towards us. But look at bear cubs. They can be desperately cute, but when they become adults, it's a whole different story. Could this be a similar scenario, I wondered? It was lightly. Very lightly. All of a sudden the creature turned around to look directly at us. In that moment my heart literally jumped in my throat. I need not have worried, for she regarded us with an air of indifference, as if she had no interest in us, and did not particularly care whether we were around or not. It seemed her naturally evasive nature had been hijacked by her hopeless despondency. It was in that serendipitous second the baby woke up. It began to make happy chuckling sounds, as its overlong arm began to tug at my hair. In that second, the mother's pyramid-shaped head swiveled around to look in our direction, for she had recognized that sound. But could she dare to hope? Could she, that this was her youngling? Her deep-set dark eyes homed in on me, with a tunnel vision, hovering curiously over the strange bundle attached to my middle. The expression on her face had changed from sadness into hope in just a second. In that poignant moment, she raised herself off the ground with such grace, towering at about 7 foot tall, covered in long flowing dark hair that was thick, silky, shiny. Her large breasts were full, her legs and arms long and lean, her upper body strong, muscular, powerful, while her dark leathery face was remarkably human. She moved towards me, her steps gliding with a level of uncertainty. Once again the little baby let out a chuckling noise and began pulling off the cap that I was wearing on my head. Now there wasn't even a lingering shadow of doubt any more. The mother recognized the distinguished tone of her infant's voice. The hope in her heart was now evacuated as jubilation, triumph, ebullience furnished her mind with a steadfast certainty. The mother stood yards away from me. She was watching me excitedly as I unleashed the buckle on the baby's sling. Then I lifted the baby out of the sling, moving deliberately towards her, holding out the baby in my outstretched arms. I've never seen a creature look so overwhelmed with an incredible joy. The creature looked at me with such a thankfulness, as if I was an angel from heaven, having opened the clouds to return her baby, an answer to her desperate prayers. She took her youngling from me, clasping it in her overlong arms, with such an expression of euphoria on her face that I found myself beginning to sob as the tears began to pour down my face, choking me up. I realized that Aviana was as bad as I was, as she too was crying gleeful tears, rejoicing in this mother's abounding happiness. The effervescent mother began to bob her youngling up and down in her arms. She stood still for a moment, holding my gaze. We locked eyes together. I could hear her say in my heart, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I watched as she carried the kid away, moving into the forest with it in her arms, glancing back at us with the warmest, bright, thankful eyes I've ever seen. Then she glided away, and when she moved, it looked like she floated. Her movements were so fluid, so graceful, so agile, so beautiful. When she was gone, Aviana and I embraced. "This is the best day of my life," she told me. "Better than any Christmas, birthday or anything." "I agree," I said. "This is one of the best days of my life too. Much like the day I married my wonderful husband. Giving birth to my children was also a very poignant day of my life. But this day, I can never forget it. The day when we reunited the abominable snowman, or Bigfoot baby if you like, with its mother. It doesn't get better than that. So there you are. That's my story. Oh my word, I'm crying. I'm literally crying reading that. It's just moved my heart. I'm literally crying. So please, that was just such a gorgeous story. Anyway, until next time, goodbye and good night.